Thanks, guys. Thank you, guys. I want to start with George Washington, if I can. George Washington was, we call him the father of the country, but when he retired, his retirement speech that he gave in 1796 is considered the most significant political speech ever given by a U.S. president at any point in time. And in that political speech, he was talking about political prosperity, which is still something we're talking about today. We could use a lot more political prosperity. We're weaponized, we're polarized, we're divided, maybe like we haven't been in 150 years. And Washington, talking about political prosperity, he said of all the habits and dispositions that lead to political prosperity, of everything that makes politics work right, he says religion and morality are indispensable supports. So if you want politics to work well, do not separate religion and morality, which is what we've been doing for 40, 50, 60 years. We've been telling church, you don't belong in politics, that's not for you, that's secular stuff. When we get out, things don't work. And he warned about that back in 1796, and he said, in vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness. So from Washington's standpoint, anyone who tries to remove religion and morality from the public square is not a patriot. Well, we've got a lot of folks we can point to that weren't patriots under that definition, not the least of which is when you look at the U.S. Supreme Court. In the 1960s, they started their quest for judicial activism and really secularizing the nation. They started with the decision in 1962, Aberdeen Shimp, Murray Corlett, or the Ingle Vitale decision in 62 that says we're not going to do voluntary prayer anymore. Voluntary prayer at schools, even if it's not denominational, we're just not going to have prayer in public. And then in 63, 12 months later, in a joint decision, Aberdeen Shimp, Murray Corlett, they said, and we're not doing Bible in schools anymore. And by the way, when they did that, the Supreme Court itself acknowledged in those two decisions, they said that their decision to take prayer and Bible out of schools, they said, was without historical or legal precedent. So there was no basis for it, but this is the way progressives work. We've never done it before, but we need to do something different. It's just time to move on, time to be different. And so with no precedent, they did that. Now, the significance of that is that when you go back to why we had Bible in schools, you can go back to folks like Benjamin Rush, founding father. John Adams said he's one of the three most notable founding fathers. He's a signer of the Declaration, ratified the Constitution, served in 3 different presidential administrations, etc. But he's called the father of public schools under the Constitution. He is the guy that in 1790 came up with the plan of how we needed to do education across the nation, all 13 states. And in 1791, he did this piece, The Bible in Schools, in which he gave a dozen reasons that we would never take the Bible out of public schools in America. So the father of public education says, look, here's why we're too smart to take the Bible out of schools. And here's the dozen reasons they gave it. It's significant that within that framework, this is one of the things he said. He says, the great enemy of the salvation of man, in my opinion, never invented a more effectual means of extinguishing Christianity from the world than by persuading mankind that it was improper to read the Bible in schools. Now, that was his warning back there. He said, this is so crazy, it'll never happen. He said, but if it did, this is the scenario. And so within that framework, if you look back at the previous courts, there was a decision in 1844 called Vidal versus Girard's Executors. In that 1844 decision, it was a unanimous decision. In an 8-0 decision, the U.S. Supreme Court was looking at a school in Philadelphia that was a government-run school. And that government-run school had decided they're not going to do the Bible in schools anymore. And in this unanimous decision, the U.S. Supreme Court said, whoa, if you're a government-run school, you will do the Bible in schools. We're not going to have a government-funded school that won't do the Bible in schools. Now, this is the kind of historical precedent we had all the way up to 1962, 63, and the court said, hey, we don't like all the stuff that's done before. We want to do something completely different. So in removing the Bible out of schools, Benjamin Rush said the Bible, when not read in schools, is seldom read in any subsequent period of life. And that's turned out to be true. We used to train up a child in the way she should go. We started the Bible at the earliest ages. We went through education that way. And so what we see now as a result is when you look at where we are today, if you take the American Bible Society, which was started in 1816 by founding fathers, signers of the Constitution, justices of the U.S. Supreme Court, you look at the list of founders of the American Bible Society, they're founding fathers. And the American Bible Society is the largest Bible society in the year, gives out 250 million, largest Bible society in the world, gives out 250 million Bibles a year. And the American Bible Society comes out annually with a report. Now, their 2022 report on the state of the Bible, they examine Bible reading habits across the country. What they showed in 2022 was a steep decline. As a matter of fact, they point out that in 2022, there were 25 million Americans who stopped reading the Bible, period, at all. Now, that was already a high number, but in 1 year alone, 25 million just stopped reading the Bible. They don't even read it anymore. When the report came out earlier this year, same thing, it went down again. We found that this year we lost another 3 million Bible readers. In the last 2 years, we've lost 28 million people who no longer even read the Bible at all. And this used to be what every kid in school read across the United States, because we believed this to be the foundation of the nation. This is where our political prosperity came from, was that common belief system, which we don't have anymore. So when you look at where we are today, biblical literacy is really high. And the biblical literacy affects the religion and morality, which affects the political prosperity. But if you look at the religion and morality today and the political prosperity today versus previous generations, now versus then, let me just back up even 50, 60 years, maybe 2 generations ago. If I go back to someone like Franklin Roosevelt, World War II president, Franklin Roosevelt in World War II, I can show you many of his speeches, but here's one that I think is significant. He said, in the formative days of the Republic, the directing influence the Bible exercised on the fathers of the nation is conspicuously evident. Now, can you find a textbook today in Christian schools or public schools where the influence of the Bible and the founders of the nation is conspicuously evident? I'll point out that this is a liberal, progressive Democrat, and he said, we all know the Bible is what made us who we are. It was so obvious you can't even deny. This is like brand new news for so many people today, and even liberal, progressive Democrats were acknowledging the fact that the Bible is what made America what it was. So we don't even teach that today. And by the way, how do we know that what he's saying is true? Well, there's a lot of ways to know. And when you look at the Constitution, we're the longest ongoing constitutional republic in the history of the world. The average length of a constitution in the history of the world for 5,800 years is 17 years for a constitution. We now are at 230 plus and ongoing. Nobody's even been close to where we are. We're so used to stability, we think it's natural. It is not natural. What we have is not normal. So political science professors at the University of Houston said, where'd they get their ideas for this document? Because this is unlike any other document. The founding fathers that put this together. And so they came out with a report, and that report on the Constitution and those who wrote the Constitution, it came out in a book called The Origins of American Constitutionalism. And they said, you know, we think if we go back and read the writings during the period of time when they were doing the documents and see who they quoted when they were writing about it, we would know where they got their ideas. And so they did that. They went back and found 15,000 writings in what we call the founding era. In those writings, they found 3,154 direct quotes. They took all of those quotes from those writings in the founding era, and they tracked them back to their original source. It took them 10 years to do so, but at the end of 10 years, they knew where every one of those quotes came from. When they put them all together, it turned out the single most cited individual during the American founding was an individual named Baron Charles Montesquieu. He wrote The Spirit of the Laws in 1752 volume said, this is where we got so much of the concept of separation of powers. He's a huge influence. The second most cited individual was Judge William Blackstone. He wrote commentaries on the laws. Thomas Jefferson said American attorneys read Blackstone's commentaries on the laws just like Muslims read the Quran. This is a book they spent all sorts of time in. The third most cited individual was John Locke. We'll talk about him a little later, but he's the source really behind so many of the ideas, specifically in the Declaration of Independence. With all these three individuals, it turns out that the single most cited source by the quotes of the Founding Fathers was the Bible. The Bible was 34% of their quotes. Now that's 12 times more than Locke. That's 4 times more than Montesquieu and Blackstone. Hands down, the single most cited source is the Bible. You would never know that today if you go through any type of political history or American history or anything else. But this goes back to what President Roosevelt was saying. He said, look, we know in the formative days of the Republic, the ideas came from the Bible. He continued, he said, we cannot read the history of our rise and development as a nation without reckoning with the place the Bible has occupied in shaping the advances of the Republic. What's he talking about? Let me give you one example. If you were to take, for example, what we call the due process clauses, the due process clauses is the 4th or the 8th Amendment. This is the right to confront your accuser, the right to have trial by jury, the right to testify in your own defense, the right to compel witnesses in your behalf. It's interesting, federal practice and procedures, the federal law books that you use to practice federal law, it goes like from here to the window over there. Volume 30 has 20 pages showing how the Bible is the basis of all the Bill of Rights, how that the right to confront your accuser comes out of John 8:10. The right to compel witnesses on your behalf is Proverbs 18:17. The right to testify in your own defense is Acts 22:1. Our federal law books even say the Bible is a source of our Bill of Rights, the due process clauses. Then when you take a president like Teddy Roosevelt, this is the statement he made. He said, the teachings of the Bible are so interwoven and so entwined with our civic and social life. Notice he did not say spiritual life. He said the Bible is so much a part of our civic and social life, it would be impossible for us to figure what life would be if these teachings were removed. What's he talking about? Well, there are several different forms of economic systems in America. But if you want to track the origins of economic systems in America, you'll find that America is the one that innovated over the last 1,000 years. We're the first nation to innovate what we call the free market system. It was built on 5 Bible verses. Specifically, Governor William Bradford talked about this when he did. By 1627, they'd implemented the free market system with the Pilgrims in Aptucka, Massachusetts. And it was based on 1 Timothy 5:8, 2 Thessalonians 3:10, Matthew 25, Luke 19, and Matthew 20. So those Bible verses gave them the economic principles that have produced the greatest economic system in the history of the world, the free market system. That came out of the Bible. The Bible talks about Bible illustrates 7 different forms of government. Our founding fathers talked about them and specifically said we think a democracy is the worst form of government. It's worse than a monarchy. It's worse than a dictatorship. They put democracy as the #1 worst form of government, and they gave examples out of the Gospels showing what the Romans did with democracy and where it led, and that was part of the reason behind the crucifixion of Jesus was their democracy. And they cited Exodus 18:21, where it says, choose out from among you leaders of tens, fifties, hundreds, and thousands. Have elections for local, county, state, and federal. They also pointed to Deuteronomy 16:18 and Deuteronomy 1:15 and 16. So even our form of government, see, and that's why Teddy Roosevelt says you wouldn't recognize our nation if our institutions that were built on the Bible were taken out of the nation. And people, they say, oh no, America's founded as a secular nation. Not so. We have innovations no other nation had. And if you go to a president like Ulysses S. Grant was president on the 100th anniversary of America, what we call the Centennial of America. He was president in 1876. And so on the 100th anniversary of America, he came out with this card. This is card, you see it says Centennial up top. It's 1776 to 1876. It says Message of President Grant. By the way, we own 160,000 pieces of actual original American history, including this card right here. Outside, one of the booths outside is called the American Journey Experience. You'll see a lot of stuff out there that is original. There's some really cool stuff from the Pilgrims, from the early colonists. You'll see it out there if you want to. And you're welcome to come to our museum at any point in time, or you're welcome to have the museum come and visit your church and show the artifacts that are part of our faith. Having said that, if you go back to what he said, notice what he's saying. And he says, this is to the children and the youth of the United States. What is the President of the United States telling all the kids in America? Here's what he said. He said, hold fast to the Bible as the sheet anchor of your liberties. Write its precepts in your heart and practice them in your lives. To the influence of this book, we're indebted for all the progress made in true civilization, and to this we must look as our guide in the future. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sins reproach to any people. Now, you can imagine what would happen today if a president did that. And you can imagine the criticism they would get from Christians across the nation if the president did that. It'd be because we've been trained that this is not what Christians do. We don't get in that arena. Oh, yeah, we get in that arena. It's a huge area for us to be in. And so the result of not knowing the Bible is we really don't read it. And that's why today only 9% of Christians read the Bible on a daily basis. We're told, give us this day our daily bread. We're kind of starving to death. We don't get daily bread. We don't eat a daily meal. And as a matter of fact, only 6% of Americans have a biblical worldview. Only 1 in 16 Americans can put Bible verses to things like our form of government or our economic systems or any of the other. The Bible deals with all of those, but only 1 in 16 Americans knows the Bible well enough to be able to do that. So when you look at the biblical literacy, it actually affects the way we see our institutions. God's institutions, you remember how this works back in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. He creates the family, Adam and Eve, and they have kids. God said, this is good. That's the institution of the family. The second institution he creates is in Genesis 9, when Noah gets off the ark, after Cain killed Abel, and everything went downhill, and God said, okay, let's just wipe this out and start again. When Noah gets off the ark, in Genesis 9:6, God gives him the first civil code of America. Hebrew scholars call it the Noahide Code. There were 7 laws. Starts with the first one, capital punishment. Noah, whoever sheds man's blood, he's got to be taken out. That's civil law. God is the one who originated civil law. He gave 613 additional laws at Mount Sinai to Moses. Everything you need from military to consanguinity to criminal justice to economic, it's all there, immigration. God gave these codes. So God is the one who originated civil government. And of course, the third institution is the church. We have the type and shadow in Genesis and Exodus where God and those books said, okay, I want a congregation that goes to a tabernacle and worships, and here's what I want the tabernacle to be, and here's what I want the congregation. So we would call that the church. That's the third institution. They all come from God. Significantly, we know more about family and church than we do about civil government. That's the one that we don't know much about, and it's significant that if you go back to John Locke, and I mentioned him earlier, he was the third most cited individual. John Locke did a book in 1690. That book was called The Two Treatises of Government. Richard Henry Lee, signer of the Declaration, said, quote, they copied the Declaration from Locke's two treatises. Now, you can read that today. It's less than an inch thick. It's less than 400 pages long. And he references the Bible more than 1,500 times to show the proper operation of civil government. You know, if you get a bunch of Christians together and say, what verses do you know where the Bible talks about civil government? We might come up with 20, 25, 30. We're not coming up with 1,500. And yet that's what we used to study. That's what we used to read. This is what we used to know is what God said about these institutions. So when you look at those, we don't do government very well, which makes us 2/3 Christians. We're doing 2/3 of God's institution. We really need to become 3/3 Christians. We need to get involved in all of those arenas. We've got to get back into that. Now, given that as a framework, what do we do now? In the few minutes I've got left, I want to take you through some very practical things that can happen. I've been involved in 13 cases of the U.S. Supreme Court, and going back to when we took God out of public life and now trying to get God back into public life, we're winning cases we haven't won in 60 years. So if you go back and see where this happened, when they took prayer and Bible out of schools back in 62 and 63, take that out of schools, the First Amendment went by the way. First Amendment was there to guarantee the free exercise of religion, and suddenly now it says, oh no, you can't have the free exercise of religion. So many cases came to the court in that period of time where people are starting to challenge everything religious. Well, if you're going to take prayer and Bible out, then let's take out this and this and this. And the court had so many cases to take religion out of public life that in 1971, in a case called Lemon versus Kurtzman, they came up and said, look, if you want to have a religious activity in public, here's the guidelines you need to follow. It's called the Lemon test. There were 3 prongs. The first thing said if you want to have the best way for you to know if a religious activity in public is constitutional is whether that religious activity is primarily secular. Now, wait a minute. You're telling me for a religious activity to be constitutional, the primary purpose of that activity has to be secular? You can't name a religious activity whose primary purpose is secular, which is why we've lost case after case after case after case after case for 60 years. But what's happened is, starting about 4 years ago, we had some justices who started actually reading the Constitution. So instead of just talking about, they would go back and read the Constitution. And reading the Constitution, one of the cases that really turned things around was in 2019, this Bladensburg Cross case. This is a World War I memorial cross erected by moms whose sons had been killed in World War I. And people said, oh, the primary purpose of that cross is not secular. You could have put up a pyramid or an orb or something else. You put up a cross. You can't do that. And the lower court said, you know what, if you'd break the arms off the cross, then it would be constitutional, because you can't have it with the cross because that's not secular. At that point in time, in that case, and it was called American Legion versus American Humanists, the court said, you know, we've got a problem here because we've been using the Lemon test for these 60 years, and if we follow the Lemon test, we're going to have to take this cross down. And this is in the same area with Arlington Cemetery and the other cross at Arlington Cemetery. We just don't think this is a good idea at all. And so they said, what we're going to do, we're going to look at it, and they said, if it's a long-standing, religiously expressive monument, symbol, and practice, then it requires a strong presumption of constitutionality. If it's been up for 100 years, it's probably constitutional. You know, it's been there for a long time. If we've been doing this since the start of the country, and so they said, we don't think that Lemon test is really a very good way of deciding what's constitutional. Look at the practice and the tradition and history and see about it. So what happened was they upheld it. Then 3 years later, in 2022, the Boston versus Shurtleff case, Boston has 3 flagpoles, and on one of the flagpoles you can fly any flag you want, just citizen free speech expression, fly anything. Well, Camp Constitution came in and said, we want to fly a Christian flag. And they said, now, you can fly anything except a Christian flag. You can't do that. And so it went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and in a 9-0 decision, which included all the liberals, the court said, no, you can't keep Christians from expressing their faith in public. You can't do that. That same year is when the Coach Kennedy case came down. You're aware of the Coach Kennedy case in Bremerton versus Kennedy. And that's the case in which the court specifically said, after 4 years of playing around the edges, they said, look, we're just telling you right now, the lemon test is gone. This is an unconstitutional test. You can do it. Now, what happens that because they made the lemon test gone, that's 7,300 previous decisions that are now out the door. Now, what that means is all this stuff we haven't been able to do for 60 years, we can now do. But you know what? If you try to do this in your community, you think you're going to get any opposition? Absolutely. You try to do some of this in your schools. Oh, principal, we can't do that. You're not the attorney. The Supreme Court said we can't. See, what happens is we have the opportunity to do it, but it's not going to change unless we walk through the door and start pushing some. What the court did, the court only opened the door. If we walk through the door, we can start taking ground back. But if we don't walk through the door, it's going to be the status quo if we don't walk through the door. So let me show you specifically. Now, there's a group called First Liberty. They're one of the many legal groups out there, really good. And they gave some guidance. But I'm going to take you to a Bible verse first before I show you First Liberty. Proverbs 21:22. The scripture says, a wise man attacks the city of the mighty and tears down the stronghold in which he trusts. A wise man loves frontal attacks on strongholds. Goes after, it's attacking the stronghold. And if you remember back in the great movie Princess Bride, have fun storming the castle. And this is what a wise man does, is he storms the castle. And so literally from a biblical standpoint, it's being offensive minded. It's going on offense. So what has happened is First Liberty, and in the last 12 months, First Liberty has won 4 religious liberty cases at the U.S. Supreme Court. They're one of the great groups out there. There's the Pacific Justice Institute. There's Liberty Council. There's Alliance Defending Freedom. All these great groups are all fighting now, and we're winning cases like we haven't won before. But these guys came up with what they call Restoring Faith in America. It's a website, restoringfaithinamerica.org, or RFIA, restoringfaithinamerica.org, and they say, look, when you take the lemon test out, these are the things you can now do. But you're going to have to go do this, and when you do it, they're going to tell you can't do it. And when they tell you can't do it, come get us, because we're happy to go to court and say you can do this. And so we're winning cases all over the nation now because we're being offensive-minded. So some of the things you can now do, let me take you through some of these things real quickly. You can now put the 10 Commandments back up in public displays. As a matter of fact, Texas right now has introduced a law that will post the 10 Commandments in every single classroom in the state of Texas. That law is being picked up in Oklahoma. It's being picked up in Arkansas. There's a whole bunch of other states that are doing that, saying we're putting the 10 Commandments back up. In the same way, it's because it was a lemon test that took them out. Memorial crosses, we've been taking down crosses for a long time. In Utah, there was a highway patrolman killed in an accident on the highway. They put up a cross as a memorial, and they say you can't have a cross. You got to take it down. Start putting crosses back up. That's fine. These memorial crosses, it's a good thing to do. Put memorial crosses back up. In the same way, public invocations, we've been told we can't have prayers in public. You can now. You can go back to having prayers in public. You can have prayers at legislatures. You can have prayers at city councils. You can have prayers at school board. If you go to a public meeting, ask them to open it in prayer. Oh, we can't do that. Yes, you can do that. You just think you can't do that. But see, we have to be offensive-minded and going after all this. The same thing with nativity scenes. Christmas is a federal holiday that celebrates the birth of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. It's a federal holiday, and suddenly we're told, well, you can't celebrate Jesus. It's got to be a season. Bring Santa Claus into it and bring Rudolph into it. So not anymore. We can go back to pure nativity scenes, having pure nativity scenes. At schools, they were told you can't sing Christmas carols. You got to sing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Jingle Bell. You can go back to singing pure Christmas carols now, because this is now constitutional legal again. The limit test is gone. That's the only reason we couldn't do it before. In the same way, in God We Trust displays, put them up every place you go. Put them on the side of cars. Put them this is in Arkansas. Every single classroom in Arkansas has a display in God We Trust visibly in every classroom. And 2 weeks ago, Louisiana passed the same law. So this is going on across the... Now, why is this important? It's really important because what you want to do is be God conscious. You remember the scripture in Romans 1? Romans 1 talked about this. Romans 1 says that since they did not think it worthwhile to retain a knowledge of God, he gave them over to a depraved mind to do what ought not to be done. When you stop being God conscious, your behavior changes. You got to have a nation that's God conscious again, and that's why it's worth fighting for these little it's only a 4-word phrase, it's only a 2-word phrase. No, it's about being God conscious, and that changes the whole behavior of the nation when you do that. Real quickly, finishing out student-led prayer. It's fine to have prayer in schools as long as students lead it. Teachers can at this point. That may come at some point. But you can have all sorts of prayer. You can have athletic prayers. You can have any kind of prayer you want if students lead it. And we need to go back to having graduation prayers as well. We used to have that. It's back on the table. This is something to encourage the kids in your church. Hey, if you're valedictorian, salutatorian, say a prayer while you're up there. Thank God for what He's helped you do in school. We need to be bold with that. Same thing with Bible courses for credit. There are now 1,200 schools, 200,000 kids who are studying the Bible in public school for credit courses. It is constitutional. It's legal. As a matter of fact, I was talking to a group of pastors up in Minnesota the other day. They're creating a brand new course in Minnesota public schools to show the influence of the Bible in the American founding. It's a historical course, but it's all based on the Bible and what the Bible does to change a culture. So you can put the Bible back in schools. Same with treatment. We've had the evolution thing for so long. You can now go back and say, no, intelligent design. God made the heavens and the earth. This is okay. None of this happens unless we get offensive minded and go on the offense with this. So I encourage you to take these as tools, change the culture around you. These are all groups that are happy to help defend you. 7,300 cases can be overturned if we will walk through the door. The court is open. And outside, there's another booth I want to mention, the United Truth Fellowship. And quite frankly, they just encourage pastors once a quarter, just hit a sermon that deals with the public issue that's going on. We do a lot of national polling with George Barna and others. Only 2.8% of pastors today are addressing things that are in the news and helping people understand how it relates. The United Truth Fellowship is saying, hey, here's some old sermons. Look at what we used to do. Let's go back to doing that. So they're outside a booth. They're happy to give you Wayne Grudem's book, Bible According to Politics, or Politics According to the Bible, and other things as well. So lots of resources. God bless you guys. Thanks for letting me share with you. See y'all.